Okay. Hello. I've failed at starting the stream a couple times over, which is pretty funny to me, I guess. But I was gonna just play a song and wait for people to come into the video real quick. Welcome to my Secret Teachings of All Ages lecture on fishes, insects, animals, reptiles, and birds, and their metaphysical meanings. Hey, what's up, brethren, brothers and sisters? Let's get started taking a look at this Secret Teachings of All Ages. It has been a little weird for me in making sure that it works because for some reason when I'm alt tabbed out of the thing, it flickers. But I think when I'm on the screen, this is what I need to test, is that when I'm on the screen, it shouldn't flicker. I hope. I'm a very professional man, and I'm very good at what I do. Oh yeah, okay, so when I'm on the screen, it doesn't flicker. That's good. Okay. Though, on my phone, it looks like it's not showing the whole. Let's see. I gotta change this till it will be the whole screen width on the. Hopefully this will all work out. I don't know why my computer has been very glitchy lately, and it's really been quite frustrating, but okay. I should be fine now. Maybe I'll cut this part out. Luckily, I can cut this part out later. I will be paying attention to the YouTube chat and the Discord. If you ping me on Discord, I'm going to be probably looking on my phone because that way I don't alt tab out of this and have it flicker. So, okay. Now that we've sorted out our technical difficulty, all right, we are getting on to fishes, insects, animals, reptiles, and birds. Seems like a very it's a very interesting topic. What chapter? I don't know the chapter number. I put the link. Actually, wait. Maybe I didn't put the link in the description. But well, I guess I'll do it. Let me edit this and put the on. Should I put it? That's not right. STA20, but that doesn't sound right either. Okay, I'm putting the link in the description here. Okay. I'm bad at streaming. Okay. And let's see. I'll just post it in the chat too. That's weird. Oh, did I put that on there? I'm an idiot today. Okay. I'm going to cut all this out. All right. Fishes, insects, animals, reptiles, and birds. Part 1. The creatures inhabiting the water, air, and earth were held in veneration by all races of antiquity. Realizing that visible bodies are only symbols of invisible forces, the ancients worshipped the divine power through the lower kingdoms of nature, because those less evolved and more simply constituted creatures responded most readily to the creative impulses of the gods. The sages of old studied living things to a point of realization that God is most perfectly understood through a knowledge of his supreme handiwork, animate and inanimate nature. Every existing creature manifests some aspect of the intelligence or power of the Eternal One, who can never be known save through a study and appreciation of his numbered but inconceivable parts. When a creature is chosen, therefore, to symbolize to the concrete human mind some concealed abstract principle, it is because its characteristics demonstrate the invisible principle's invisible action. Fishes, insects, animals, reptiles, and birds appear in the religious symbolism of nearly all nations because the forms and habits of these creatures and the media in which they exist closely relate them to various generative and germinative powers of nature, which were considered as prima facie evidence of divine omnipresence. The early philosophers and scientists, realizing that all life has its origin in water, chose the fish as the symbol of the life germ. The fact that fishes are most prolific makes the simile still more apt. While the early priests may not have possessed the instruments necessary to analyze the spermatozoon, they concluded by deduction that it must resemble a fish. It's a very interesting thing. It would be very... I've often wondered this because there are pre-microscope renderings of sperm as fish, and it's very strange to see fish being depicted that way, but it makes sense, I suppose, in that people would be very familiar with seeing fish in a stream, and so fish moving through a stream of fluid would seem like the most logical thing. Though I wonder why they thought that they were animals at all, and they didn't consider, because they called it seed, if they would not think it was like a plant seed, and why they would think it was like a fish. This is one of those things that I feel like gives some kind of credence to the idea that there was a previously fairly advanced civilization in terms of technology that was then lost, and we have only recovered knowledge, as Plato suggested, is through a process of anamnesis, of unforgetting, of remembering what we have forgotten. This idea that creatures, or by looking into the natural world, we can understand God, is a very important principle to the natural philosopher of the Renaissance era and the era of the Enlightenment. It's very important to think about what, if you're trying to make conclusions about God, you only have so much evidence, and that evidence consists of the entire physical universe. And really, all physical and mental creations can in some way be seen as reflections of aspects of God. That is one of the ways that the Hermetic principle, as above, so below, is stated, that, or in Kabbalah, the idea of Adam Kadmon is that there is the macroprosopis, or the great face, and the microprosopis, or small face of God. And the human being is the microprosopis. And just like Adam is the small man, and Adam Kadmon is the cosmic man, who's God. And that idea is that man in the Bible being created in the image of God, and God's name being plural, Elohim, is implying that all of the Elohim is the name of God that implies all the forces of nature, a plural, or plurality. And humans were created in the image of Elohim. But being an infinite image, one might say that all information must inherently be contained within man if it is contained within God. And just as if one splits a hologram, one just receives two smaller holograms, any division of the infinite is itself infinite. When we talk about discerning God, often there's basically two methods by which one can make assumptions about the divine. And one method is by narrowing what the divine is not. We can say that, for example, you can say that the divine is not finite. The divine is not graspable. The divine is not this thing or that thing. And you try to understand what God is through understanding what God isn't, through the things that we can say that God isn't. We can say God isn't weak, or God isn't impotent. He has omnipotence, so he's the opposite of impotent. And that idea is one that's very common in Catholic theology, but one that is very common in much of the world, and especially the Orient, is the observation of nature as a way to know God. And so you see that in Taoism, Lao Tzu was teaching the way to know nature was by studying, or the way to know the Tao was by studying the world. And because the Tao, the unknowable source of all things, which they didn't personify in the same way that God is personified as a he, but Tao is a important principle nonetheless that is comparable to God in most all ways. Almost all ways is a comparable concept. The study of what forms the myriad, or the many infinite manifestations, is an indication of the infinite nature that spawned them. And so by studying these, we can see that each one of them must represent a subset within God, and then in that sense represents a certain aspect, or a set of aspects in the divine nature. You see me, I'm checking my phone here because I'm trying to get to where I am able to read. Yes. In Tandem, DJ says they look like tadpoles. And so they weren't that far off. The ancients weren't that far off by thinking that the spermatozoan looks like fish. Tadpoles is pretty much what they look like. And fish is very interesting in a lot of ways, but we will get into that now. The fishes were sacred to the Greeks and the Romans, being connected with the worship of Aphrodite. An interesting survival of pagan ritualism is found in the custom of eating fish on Friday. Freya, in whose honor the day was named, was the Scandinavian Venus, and this day was sacred among many nations to the goddess of beauty and fecundity. This analogy further links the fish with the procreative mystery. Friday is also sacred to the followers of the Prophet Muhammad. The word nun, which is a Hebrew letter also, means both fish and growth. And as Inman says, the Jews were led to victory by the son of the fish, whose other names were Joshua or Yeshua and Jesus, the Savior. Nun is still the name of a female devotee of the Christian faith. Among early Christians, 3 fishes were used to symbolize the Trinity, and the fish is also one of the 8 sacred symbols of the great Buddha. It is also significant that the dolphin should be sacred to both Apollo, the solar savior, and to Neptune. It was believed that this fish carried shipwrecked sailors to heaven on its back. The dolphin was accepted by early Christians as the emblem of Christ, because the pagans had viewed this beautiful creature as a friend and benefactor of man. The heir to the throne of France, the Dauphin, may have secured his title from the ancient pagan symbol of the divine preservative power. The first advocates of Christianity likened converts to fishes, who at the time of baptism returned again into the sea of Christ. Another connection between Christianity and the fish is in the Vesica Piscis, which is known as the womb of the fish. It's a geometric symbol that is made by taking 2 circles, and the perfect Vesica Piscis is made by taking the center point of those 2 circles and making that it must overlap the circumference of the other circle. So each circle overlaps each other in such a way that they pass through the other circle's center point. I can bring up an image here, even though it may cause some flickering. And this should be yes, I knew I had one that was named something good. The Vesica Piscis. So this is the Vesica Piscis extrapolated further. The perfect Vesica Piscis, as you can see, is, well, the Vesica Piscis, you can see a much thinner Vesica Piscis in the middle, which is made first. The shape is made by taking the overlapping center points, and in this case, it's not, which makes it strange because the reason to do this, to take the center point of the other circle, is that in this way, by inscribing a triangle within it. So this Vesica Piscis is actually one that doesn't hold the power of the Vesica Piscis, because it doesn't have the same meaning. And the meaning of it is in the fact that you're able to derive the equilateral triangle without making any measurements, by drawing 2 circles that have overlapping center points, and then drawing a line between the center points and the line between and lines to the apex of where the circles meet at the peak. So there you go. That is called the womb of the fish, and it is a symbol that often, actually maybe I will open up another image here, because it often is used in images of Christ, where often is used in images of Christ, like this one, and you can see it enclosing Christ. So when they do this, they usually don't use the geometrical vesica, but they used the shape of the vesica, which is like an oval with pointed ends. And this womb of the fish is an astrological reference. And in fact, this entire image is an astrological reference. But the astrological reference is to Pisces, that representing the age of Jesus. And in the corners here, Jesus is held on the cross. This is the zodiac cross of Taurus, Aquarius, which are directly across from each other in the sky. And this is Leo and Scorpio, which are direct. Oh wait, no, it's so actually I guess it's Aquarius and Leo are directly across from each other, and Scorpio and Taurus are directly across from each other. Scorpio used to be called the eagle, and that's what it appears as here. Primitive peoples believed the sea and land were inhabited by strange creatures, and early books on zoology contain curious illustrations of composite beasts, reptiles, and fishes, which did not exist at the time the medieval authors compiled these voluminous books. In the ancient initiatory rituals of the Persian, Greek, and Egyptian mysteries, the priests disguised themselves as composite creatures, thereby symbolizing different aspects of human consciousness. They used birds and reptiles as emblems of their various deities, often creating forms of grotesque appearance and assigning to them imaginary traits, habits, and places of domicile, all of which were symbolic to certain spiritual and transcendental truths thus concealed from the profane. The phoenix made its nest of incense and flames. The unicorn had the body of a horse, the feet of an elephant, and the tail of a wild boar, as well as a horn. The upper half of the centaur's body was human, and the lower half equine. The pelican of the hermetis fed its young from its own breast, and to this bird were assigned other mysterious attributes, which could have been true only allegorically. Though regarded by many writers of the Middle Ages as actual living creatures, none of these, the pelican excepted, ever existed outside of the symbolism of the mysteries. Possibly they originated in rumors of animals then little known. In the temple, however, they became a reality, for they signified the manifold characteristics of man's nature. The manticora, or manticore, had certain points in common with the hyena. The unicorn may have been the single-horned rhinoceros, when it's said to have elephant's feet. And the tail of a wild boar, it sounds an awful lot like a rhinoceros. To the student of the secret wisdom, these composite animals and birds simply represent various forces working in the invisible worlds. This is a point which nearly all writers on the subject of medieval monsters seem to have overlooked. See Valisis Aldrovandis' Monstrum Historia, 1642, and Physica Curiosa by P. Gaspare Sciotto, 1697. I wish I could get those books. Those sound like they would be amazing. It must be so cool to read about. There are also legends to the effect that long before the appearance of human beings, there existed a race or species of composite creatures which were destroyed by the gods. The temples of antiquity preserved their own historical records and possessed information concerning the prehistoric world that has never been revealed to the uninitiated. According to these records, the human race evolved from a species of creature that partook somewhat of the nature of an amphibian, for at the time, primitive man had the gills of a fish and was partly covered with scales. To a limited degree, the human embryo demonstrates the possibility of such a condition. I guess he's referring to the fact that there's kind of a fish-like phase of the embryo. As a result of the theory of man's origin in water, the fish was looked upon as the progenitor of the human family. This gave rise to the ichthyolatry of the Chaldeans, Phoenicians, and Brahmins. The American Indians believe that the waters of lakes, rivers, and oceans are inhabited by a mysterious people, the Water Indians. That's a belief in many places. Obviously, we talk about Mer people, but many cultures have such beliefs that there are sea people, or people that live in the sea and are able to live in the water full time. Some people say they're referring to dolphins or to manatees or to something like that. It's unknown. And I don't know of the records of antiquity that he's referring to. Perhaps he's referring to something theosophical. Maybe H.P. Blavatsky or something like that. I don't hold much credence to things like that, but they're very interesting legends. As far as a race of composite creatures which was destroyed by the gods, such has been proposed in various ways. As they talk about dogmen. For example, in medieval texts, there were dog-headed. They often depict in medieval texts, in Christian medieval texts, these dog-headed men. And people said, oh, it's a metaphor of some kind. It comes from, I think, a depiction of Saint John as being a dog-headed. I think it was Saint John. And being from a race of people that had heads like dogs. That, whether it has any truth or not, I don't know. But there's many types of these composite beings, of having the body of a human and the head of something else, or some other type of composite. For example, Mer people having the upper torso of a man or a woman and the bottom of a fish, or centaurs being a human and a horse. But another interesting thing is that in the testimony, well, you could use quotations of people like Corey Goode in recent times, I don't lend credence much to what they have to say about these things, but their claim is that today in secret government labs, they claim, Corey Goode, for example, claims to have worked in I believe it was Corey Goode. Well, anyway, there's some of these series on Gaia or Gaiam TV. They have some of these quote unquote whistleblowers who say that they were working in these underground labs, and the Alex Jones brings this up too, that they were creating hybrid people and various animals, hybrid lamb and person, and hybrid just various kinds of human and animal hybrids, supposedly for the harvesting of organs, it has been suggested. An interesting conspiracy theory. And Tandem DJ brings up, it's from Cosmic Disclosure, which is a series on Gaia TV. I no longer subscribe there. I didn't really feel like it. They had a lot of BS on there, and I felt like maybe they were trying to pull one over on people somewhat, or they were disinformation outlet. I don't know, but they have a lot of good quality content too, as if you do yoga and such. Anyway, they in Tandem DJ asks, would this be referring to the creatures' hybridizations made by the fallen angels Nephilim before the flood in the time of Noah? Well, it could be referring to that. That is not... it's definitely part of the modern versions of the legend. There's not that much biblical to indicate it, but one of the reasons that God could have destroyed the beings before Noah was that he wanted to create a bottleneck. And he didn't want all these other kinds of humans to exist genetically. He wanted only this one strain of humans. He perfected humanity in some way. And this could be a case of talking about, for example, the demiurge as opposed to the Most High, El Elyon. And there is a distinction, and when in Psalms there's a distinction. For example, in Psalm 82 refers to Elohim and El Elyon in the same sentence, where the Elohim had gathered in a conference. It seems like in Hebrew it definitely seems like there's a group of people gathered as Elohim, and El Elyon, El the highest, God the highest, speaks to them and says, ye are gods. That's the famous quote that Jesus later quotes to the Pharisees. Is it not written in your scripture, ye are gods? But that those Elohim, they could be, sometimes people think that the Elohim represents a lesser class of being. It's more in line with what pagans considered gods, and that the Judaism should actually be considered henotheism, which is that El, Yahweh, is the first among many, or the ultimate God, and that there are many smaller facets. And that is actually in line with, for example, Hinduism. Hinduism is much the same. And in that for that reason, I tend to err on that side of things, that if everything that we were talking about previously is an aspect of God, of aspect of the divine, then there's no reason for us to think that the aspects start or stop at atoms going down, or at animals and human beings going up. There's maybe larger and larger aggregate aspects of God that are collected. And why would there not be intermediate creatures between humans and God? And definitely people believe in angels, which are messengers of God. And they, so it seems to me that there must be, and also demons. Demon doesn't necessarily mean, especially in Greek, didn't mean something evil, but just a spirit, some kind of spirit. And in Greek and in Latin, it doesn't mean a devil, diavolo. It is a daemon or demon, which is not the same thing, which is a spirit. And they have a range of good and evil that parallels human beings. They could be anything. They're not restricted. It's somewhat like jinn in Islam. In any case, there's all kinds of possibilities for what could have been created before the modern day, but obviously we don't have very much evidence for much of it. The mythological evidence, if we can call mythologies evidence, is interesting to me in that it is it tends to be fairly consistent throughout the world, where people are talking about these kinds of beings, various kinds of beings. People tended to make up, if they made them up, they made up the same kinds of beings, and they spread stories about the same kinds of beings. There's good reasons why they might. The stars and the planets, observing their pathways and ascribing stories to them, and those stories eventually taking on the characteristics of gods and being considered as such, is one easy way to chalk up the early formation of a pagan pantheon. In any case, we're straying farther and farther from the topic here. So let's return. The fish has been used as an emblem of damnation, but among the Chinese it typified contentment and good fortune, as with the koi fish, and fishes appear on many of their coins. When Typhon or Set, the Egyptian evil genius, genius is like jinn or genie. Genie is actually genii in genii with two eyes, is the plural of genius. Genie is basically genius in plural. So when Typhon or Set, the Egyptian evil genius, had divided the body of the god Osiris into 14 parts, he cast one part into the river Nile, which was the phallus, where, according to Plutarch, it was devoured by 3 fishes: the Lepidoptus, probably the leopard of Siren, the Phagris, and the Oxyrhynchus, a form of pike. For this reason, the Egyptians would not eat the flesh of these fishes, believing that to do so would be to devour the body of their god, which Christians seem to have no problem with. Guess that's a difference in taste. When used as a symbol of evil, the fish represented the earth, man's lower nature, and the tomb, the sepulchre of the mysteries. Thus was Jonah 3 days in the belly of the great fish, as Christ was 3 days in the tomb, and as Christ says that that a wicked generation asks for a sign, and he shall receive no sign but the sign of Jonah, which is the sign that of descending into the belly of the fish, or being in the belly of the fish for 3 days. So Jesus descended to hell, or in the belly of the earth for 3 days. There's actually there's a mythology about this, that actually Jesus, there's some scripture, and then actually Islam retains this scripture. It's kind of in the Syriac tradition in Christianity, is that all souls have to approach the fire after death, but righteous souls won't be burned by it. And so there's a belief, for example, in Mormonism, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that Jesus, in the 3 days of his that since his crucifixion, before his resurrection, he actually descended into hell in order to preach to the souls that were trapped in hell, and to give them a chance to accept him as their savior and to be saved. And then he was resurrected because he couldn't remain in hell for too long, and also to fulfill the sign, having said that he would raise up the temple in 3 days, and so on. Several early church fathers believed that the whale which swallowed Jonah was the symbol of God the Father, who, when the hapless prophet was thrown overboard, accepted Jonah into his own nature until a place of safety was reached. The story of Jonah is really a legend of initiation into the mysteries, and the great fish represents the darkness of ignorance which engulfs man when he's thrown over the side of the ship, is born into the sea of life, into the sea, which is life. The custom of building ships in the form of fishes or birds, common in ancient times, could give rise to the story, and mayhap Jonah was merely picked up by another vessel and carried into port, the pattern of the ship causing it to be called a great fish. Veritatis simplex oratio est. The truth is in the simplest speech. More probably, the whale of Jonah is based upon the pagan mythological creature Hippocampus, part horse and part dolphin, for the early Christian statues and carvings show the composite creature and not a true whale. Another thing that I wanted to bring up here was that if Jonah was 3 days in the whale, that parallels the 3 degrees of Freemasonry, or of Bluecraft Masonry, of the entered apprentice, the fellowcraft Mason, and then the master Mason. So after 3 degrees or 3 days, the man emerges from the darkness of ignorance and is asked to accept the light. One reason that people accuse it of being a Luciferian cult. Lucifer being the light bringer, or the star Venus. Though Jesus is also associated with the star Venus, as in Revelation, where he's called Stella Matutina, meaning Stella Matutina means the morning star. So let's take a look at this picture here. The first incarnation, or Matsya avatar of Vishnu, from Picard's religious ceremonials. The fish has often been associated with the world's saviors. Vishnu, the Hindu redeemer, who takes upon himself 10 forms for the redemption of the universe, was expelled from the mouth of a fish in his first incarnation. Vishnu is also, one of his incarnations is Krishna, which some people believe to be Christo, or in fact, in the Bengali language, when Krishna is appealed to or invoked in a prayer, he is invoked grammatically. His name is changed to Christo. Isis, when nursing the infant Horus, is often shown with a fish on her headdress. Oannes, the Chaldean savior, borrowed from the Brahmins, is depicted with the head and body of a fish, from which the human form protrudes at various points. Jesus was often symbolized by a fish. He told his disciples that they should become fishers of men. The sign of the fish was also the first monogram of the Christians. The mysterious Greek name of Jesus, Yesu, or Ichthus, means a fish. Ichthus means a fish, and is an acronym for Jesu Christo Theo Ios Soter, which is Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior. The fish was accepted as a symbol of Christ by a number of early canonized church fathers. St. Augustine likened the Christ to a fish that had been broiled, and it is also pointed out that the flesh of that fish was the food of the righteous and holy men, and also Christ performed the miracle of the fish and the loaves, giving bread and fish to his congregation. So the congregation takes bread as part of the sacrament, but they often leave out the fish. Maybe they ought to take bread and fish. It would be quite healthy. It is reasonable to suppose, or let's take a look at the picture now that we talked about it. Okay, so here, this, I'm assuming, is the incarnation that they're speaking of, the being emerging from the mouth of a fish. Actually, there's an interesting Islamic figure who's also either a fish and transformed into a man, or he emerged from the mouth of a fish. And he is a paradoxical figure that has a lot of interesting things said about him in Islamic tradition, but only a very short section of the Quran speaks of him. Supposedly a wise man who will be important in the end of days. So I wonder if this is, it says something up here, who that is, but I cannot tell. So, very interesting. Some kind of demon here looks like it has been slain by the sword of kind of a mer person. Okay. It is reasonable to suppose that the mysterious sea serpents, which according to Mayan and Toltec legends brought the gods to Mexico, were Viking or Chaldean ships built in the shape of composite sea monsters or dragons. It could also, I guess it could also be if they were related to the Latter-day Saints story. H.P. Blavatsky advances the theory that the word Cetus, the great whale, is derived from Keto, a name for the fish god Dagon, and that Jonah was actually confined in a cell hollowed out in the body of a gigantic statue of Dagon, after he had been captured by Phoenician sailors and carried to one of their cities. There is no doubt a great mystery in the gigantic form of Cetus, which is still preserved as a constellation. I might have an image here that I could bring up of Dagon, the fish god. So this is important here because here you see Dagon, the fish god, and the Pope with his mitre. And his mitre is based upon the fish god Dagon, who was the god in Sumeria, Enki. This is a I don't want to call it an argument or dispute. It's a difference of opinions that I have with some people regarding the parallels in Sumerian mythology between with Jesus. And I think by comparing Latter-day Saint revelation with ancient Sumerian belief, it seems clear to me that Enlil plays the part of Lucifer in Latter-day Saint tradition almost exactly the same. And that Enki plays the part of Jesus as the savior of mankind who frees us from slavery. But Enlil wants to keep mankind enslaved. And so here is the fish god Dagon, who is a version of Enki. I think it's either Babylonian or later Akkadian. I hit my funny bone really hard. My hand went partially numb. Ow. That sucks. Okay. All right. Let me go back here so it will stop flickering. Periodically, I keep checking my my phone. My friend says, "Ouch, heard that." Yeah. My hand still feels weird. It feels like hot. It's weird. Okay. Anyway, so it's a very important concept, and the fish god is associated with Jesus and many of the gods of antiquity. Very important. According to many scattered fragments extant, man's lower nature was symbolized by a tremendous, awkward creature resembling a great sea serpent or dragon called Leviathan. All symbols having serpentine form or motion signify the solar energy in one of its many forms. And actually, this is supported in a lot of Kabbalistic literature, which speaks of. There's references of actually two serpents in the Bible. One of them is called Leviathan, and then there's a female serpent whose name escapes me at the moment. But basically, there's a giant male and female serpent, and the male serpent is seen as being the constellation Draco, which, especially about about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, perfectly encircled the North Pole, and so because the pole star shifts over time, and so it was like the North Pole was wreathed in this serpent, and it was used as an image, and it's quoted, or it's used as an image also in the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, Kabbalistic, one of the Kabbalistic masterworks. The female is, by comparison, the equatorial belt, and so one is seen as being like hanging and coiled in the stars, and the other is coiled around the Earth, around the equator of the Earth, or around the edge of the Earth, if you believe in the flat Earth kind of type of theory. This is kind of I believe it's Jormungandr is Jormungandr is the Norse great serpent who encircles the earth. And then there's also the Sumerian legend of Tiamat. Tiamat was the serpent goddess who Marduk slayed in order to create Earth. And there's various versions of that. That's a later myth. Marduk is later. He's the son of Enki, our previous. Speaking of as the fish god, Marduk is the son of Enki. Slew the serpent that circled the world, or created the world from the body of that serpent, Tiamat. So, in tandem, DJ brings up in the chat, Electric Sky Universe speaks, the Electric Sky or Electric Universe theory speaks of serpent or dragon forms appearing in the sky as being electric or plasma discharges. That could also be true. There's lots of serpent imagery that's used. And in fact, so Scorpio used to be considered a serpent as well as being considered an eagle. So before it was considered a scorpion, for example, in the time of Moses, it was actually considered a snake. And it's very important in the biblical astrology because Moses casts down his staff and it becomes a serpent, which is demonstrating his power over the inner sign of that astrological age. The outer sign of which is the bull, which he demonstrates his power over by melting down the golden bull that is created by the Hebrews as a false idol. In any case, I will continue here. He was saying that they symbolize solar energy in one of its many forms. The serpentine patterns or motions symbolize solar energy, and so that ties in very closely with the electric universe theory that in tandem DJ brought up. And yes, this ties in with a great world serpent kind of mythology, which also ties in with the biblical mythology of the serpent who tempts Eve to eat the apple, causing Adam and Eve to fall into the world or be exiled into the world. All of those stories involve a serpent in some way. It's pretty interesting to me. This great creature of the sea, the great serpent, therefore symbolizes the solar life force imprisoned in water, which is symbolic of ether, though he doesn't mention it here, and also the divine energy coursing through the body of man, where, until transmuted, it manifests itself as a wreathing, twisting monster, man's greeds, passions, and lusts, and which is in the Kundalini Yoga Upanishad is brought in the Hindu tradition into being a intertwining serpent energy which rises up through the spinal pathway and activates the chakras on its way to the crown. So it rises from the base of the spine near the perineum all the way up to the crown, and then there's supposed to be lower and higher octaves of chakras that are in our etheric bodies outside of us, outside of our physical body. But in any case, so this when it's not tamed, this energy is manifest as man's greeds, passions, and lusts, and learning to control it is what draws it up the chakral channel. Because the lower chakras are associated with lower forms of behavior. So, for example, the lowest chakra is concerned with reproduction, and that's our most basic instinct. Our two most basic instincts, the two lowest chakras, are concerned with food and with reproduction, and our two most basic instincts are eating and screwing. And that is essentially the way that humans are. or that really any animal is. And as you add these chakras on top, we gain layers of body, spiritual body, on each other. And as one follows an ethical path and a path of practice, it draws the serpent energies away from being spread out throughout the body and being focused on food and sex. It draws them up toward the heart, where they might be expressed into compassion, or the throat, where they might be transformed into expression, or to the third eye, where they might be transformed into insight, or the crown, where they might be transformed into enlightenment. So that is a basic system of that. There's we might also talk about a solar plexus chakra. It's split on who speaks of it. It's not exactly what we're getting into here, but the symbolic serpent energy is one that is found all over the world with regards to mankind's awakening. And in some sense, even the Garden of Eden story plays into that. Among the symbols of Christ as the Savior of men are a number relating to the mystery of his divine nature, concealed within the personality of the lowly Jesus. The Gnostics divided the nature of Jesus, or the nature of the Christian Redeemer, into two parts. The one, Jesus, a mortal man, and the other, Christos, a personification of Nous, the principle of cosmic mind. Nous, the greater, was, for the period of 3 years, from baptism to crucifixion, using the fleshly garment of the mortal man, Jesus. This is the same as basically the symbol of Vishnu using the Krishna. So Krishna being another word for Christo, Krishna is an avatar or an avatara of Vishnu. And this way of looking at it is seeing Jesus as being an avatar of Vishnu, basically. But Christos, the personification of the cosmic mind, which is split into a trinity in Hinduism, with basically, you could say, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost are the principle of the mind, the body, and the spirit. And that's the same split kind of in... it's similar in Hinduism, where you have the creator, sustainer, and destroyer. You could also see them, Brahma as being representative of material nature, Vishnu of mental nature, and Shiva of spiritual nature. So, in order to illustrate this point of Nous as Christos, as Jesus, and still conceal it from the ignorant, many strange and often repulsive creatures were used whose rough exteriors concealed magnificent organisms. Keneally, in his notes on the Book of Enoch, notes that why the caterpillar was a symbol of the Messiah is evident, because under a lowly, creeping, and wholly terrestrial aspect, he conceals the beautiful butterfly form, with its radiant wings, emulating in its various colors the rainbow, the serpent, the salmon, the scarab, the peacock, and the dying dolphin, which is said to change colors at death. As well as, for example, the goldfish was prized in Rome because it would change colors as it was dying. Oh, welcome to our friend Lady Angel Grey. The word noosphere, someone in Tandem DJ is bringing up the word noosphere, which is, and asking, was it derived from nous? And it does. It is the same word. NOO is the same like nootropic drugs, or pharmaceuticals are things that are meant to build up the mind. They're good for the mind, and so they help you think. This is the idea behind them. So the noosphere, and you'll also see, I believe, the astronaut Edgar Mitchell was involved in a group called the Noetic Institute, which was this institute of studying the mind. And so Edgar Mitchell performed a psychic research experiment when he was in space, and supposedly was successful, but you'll have to look that up separately. Okay. Now we're moving on to insects. And before I move on to insects, I'm just doing a quick check to make sure that no one is saying anything on Discord. Sometimes people talk to me on Discord and they don't say anything, or they don't ping me. So I'm trying to use either the YouTube chat or the or Discord. Well, I'm trying to use mainly the YouTube chat because that's what I can keep on. Yeah, there are very interesting studies with the study of noetics, and I highly recommend looking into some of the things in that aspect. Someone on our Discord just recently posted an interesting thing, lecture by Rupert Sheldrake, who also had some interesting takes on, mostly he talks about, I believe, morphogenetics, but that involves the idea of a noosphere, or a world mind. And the world mind, or what's called the world soul sometimes in English, but is the psyche of the world, is talked about in Plato. So it's an old idea talked about by the ancient Greek philosophers as well. Insects. In 1609, Henry Coenrath's Amphitheatrum Sapientiae Aeterni was published. Eliphas Levi declared that within its pages are concealed all the great secrets of magical philosophy. I've never found a copy of it. I would really love to read it because of this. A remarkable plate in this work shows the Hermetic sciences being attacked by the bigoted and ignorant pedagogues of the 17th century. In order to express his complete contempt for his slanderers, Coenrath made out of each a composite beast, adding donkey ears to one and a false tail to another. He reserved the upper part of the picture for certain petty backbiters, whom he gave appropriate forms. The air was filled with strange creatures, great dragonflies, winged frogs, and birds with human heads, and other weird forms which defy description, heaping venom, gossip, spite, slander, and other forms of persecution upon the secret arcanum of the wise. The drawing indicated that their attacks were ineffectual. Poisonous insects were often used to symbolize the deadly power of the human tongue. Insects of all kinds were also considered emblematic of the nature spirits and demons, for both were believed to inhabit the atmosphere. Medieval drawings showing magicians in the act of invoking spirits often portray the mysterious powers of the other world, which the conjurer has exorcised, as appearing to him in composite part insect forms. The early philosophers apparently held the opinion that the disease which swept through communities in the form of plagues was actually living creatures, but instead of considering a number of tiny germs, they viewed the entire plague as one individuality and gave it a hideous shape to symbolize its destructiveness. The fact that plagues came in the air caused an insect or a bird to be used as their symbol. Beautiful symmetrical forms were assigned to all benevolent or all natural benevolent conditions or powers, but to unnatural or malevolent powers were assigned contorted and abnormal figures. The evil one was either hideously deformed or else of the nature of certain despised animals. A popular superstition during the Middle Ages held that the devil had the feet of a rooster, while the Egyptians assigned to Typhon, the devil of Egypt, the body of a hog. and also the tail of a crocodile, I believe. The habits of the insects were carefully studied. Therefore, the ant was looked upon as emblematic of industry and foresight, as it stored up supplies for winter and also had the strength to move objects many times its own weight. The Hopi Indians in New Mexico and Arizona, they have a legend about the Hopi being saved from the Great Flood. They have their own Great Flood myth, as most cultures in the world do, and they say that the Hopi were saved from the Great Flood by the ant people who lived in the Grand Canyon. And so they were led into tunnels beneath the Grand Canyon by these ant people. And the ant people taught them to store food underground and to grow food underground. And to this day, they still sprout legumes in caves as part of traditional Hopi agriculture. So, and the locusts, which swept down in clouds and in some parts of Africa and Asia obscured the sun and destroyed every green thing, were considered fit emblems of passion, disease, hate, and strife. For these emotions destroy all that is good in the soul of man and leave a barren desert behind them. In the folklore of various nations, certain insects are given special significance, but the ones which have received worldwide veneration and consideration are the scarab, the king of the insect kingdom, the scorpion, the great betrayer, the butterfly, the emblem of metamorphosis, and the bee, the symbol of industry, very important in both Mormonism and in Masonry. The Egyptian scarab is one of the most remarkable symbolic figures ever conceived by the mind of man, and has evolved by the erudition of the priestcraft from a simple insect which, because of its peculiar habits and appearance, properly symbolized the strength of the body, the resurrection of the soul, and the eternal and incomprehensible Creator in his aspect as Lord of the Sun. E.A. Wallace Budge says, in effect, of the worship of the scarab by the Egyptians, yet another view held in primitive times was that the sky was a vast meadow over which a huge beetle crawled, pushing the disk of the sun before him. This beetle was the sky god, and arguing from the example of the beetle, Scarabaeus sacer, which was observed to roll along with its hind legs a ball which was believed to contain its eggs, the early Egyptians thought that the ball of the sky god contained his egg and that the sun was his offspring. And another reason why we derive the word S-O-N, sun, from S-U-N, sun. Thanks, however, to the investigations of the eminent entomologist Monsieur J.H. Favre, we now know that the ball, which the Scarabaeus sacer rolls along, contains not its eggs, but dung that is to serve as food for its egg, which it lays in a carefully prepared place. I wonder if that has an important spiritual meaning too, because maybe the sun is just dung for Jesus, and that in that sense, Lucifer, the light bringer, could be like the sun. It's dung for the feeding of God's egg. Initiates of the Egyptian mysteries were sometimes called scarabs, again lions and panthers. The scarab was the emissary of the sun, symbolizing light, truth, and regeneration. Stone scarabs, called heart scarabs, which are about 3 inches long, were placed in the heart cavity of the dead when the organ was removed to be embalmed separately as part of the process of mummifying. Some maintain that the stone beetles were merely wrapped in the winding cloths at the time of preparing the body for eternal preservation, rather than being placed into the body cavity. The following passage concerning this appears in the great Egyptian book of initiation, the Book of the Dead. And behold, thou shalt make a scarab of green stone, which shall be placed in the breast of a man, and it shall perform for him the opening of the mouth. The funeral rites of many nations bear a striking resemblance to the initiatory ceremonies of their mysteries. They tend to be similar. Even baptism is seen as being a symbolic descent into the grave and rising up anew as if resurrected. Most initiations involve symbolism of death and resurrection. Going back briefly, I just think that the idea that Lucifer could be the dung that is used to fertilize the egg of God. God, Christos, being the nous or the noosphere, the world soul, is then fertilized or given nutrients by much of the evil that is in the world. In a certain sense, the sun is a source of heat, which can be greatly destructive, but also the source of life. Life itself is often the source of suffering, which can be greatly destructive, but it is also the source of joy. It's an interesting series of thoughts to go down, and I think that there's much more interesting insight to be mined out of that basic statement in the past, and I welcome you to consider it yourself and let me know what you think about it. Okay, so Ra, the god of the sun, had three important aspects. As the creator of the universe, he was symbolized by the head of a scarab and was called Khepera, which signified the resurrection of the soul and a new life at the end of the mortal span. As we were saying, that the death and resurrection is often important in initiation, as well as funerary rites, of course. The mummy cases of the Egyptian dead were nearly always ornamented with scarabs. Usually one of these beetles, with outspread wings, was painted on the mummy case directly over the breast of the dead. The finding of such great numbers of small stone scarabs indicate that they were a favorite article of adornment among the Egyptians. Because of its relationship to the sun, the scarab symbolized the divine part of man's nature. The fact that its beautiful wings were concealed under its glossy shell typified the winged soul of man hidden within its earthly sheath. The Egyptian soldiers were given the scarab as their special symbol because the ancients believed that these creatures were all of the male sex, and consequently appropriate emblems of virility, strength, and courage. Of course, that can't be true. Plutarch noted that the fact that the scarab rolled its peculiar ball of dung backwards, while the insect itself faced the opposite direction, this made it an especially fitting symbol for the sun because this orb, according to Egyptian astronomy, was rolling from west to east, although apparently moving in the opposite direction. What does that mean? That's a very interesting statement because of things I know about occult astrology. But let's read the rest of this first. An Egyptian allegory states that the sunrise is caused by the scarab unfolding its wings, which stretch out as glorious colors on each side of its body, the solar globe. And that when it folds its wings under its dark shell at sunset, night follows. Khepera, the scarab-headed aspect of Ra, is often symbolized riding through the sea of the sky in a wonderful ship called the Boat of the Sun. The interesting thing about him saying that in Egyptian astronomy they saw it as rolling from west to east, although it apparently moves in the opposite direction. It's very interesting because in what is called the Black Sun mythology, the Black Sun is what's called the spiritual sun or the invisible sun, the sun that can't be seen. And it is seen as being in a counterbalance precisely to the position of the sun. So we could say that it is on the opposite side. And that is why, for example, when we determine the current astrological age by the constellation that the sun rises in on the spring equinox of a given year. Right now it's rising in Pisces, the constellation, but maybe not in Pisces, the zodiac house, because of various things that I won't get into. But the in mythology, though, the secret ruling house of the age is actually the opposite house, which is the house that the first ray of the sun touches on the western horizon, which is the constellation that is setting. And what is interesting about that is that the house Virgo, well, our current house is the house Virgo, but basically the idea is that secretly the house of importance is the house of this secret sun, the black sun, which is the counterbalance to the bright sun. This also goes back to what we were saying about the sun almost just being a ball of dung being rolled for the true Son of God, the black sun. Could be an interesting path to go down in terms of interpreting these things. So now we'll go and take a look at these pictures. So this is the Manticora from Redgrove's Bygone Beliefs. The most remarkable of allegorical creatures was the Manticora, which Ctesias describes as having a flame-colored body, lion-like in shape, 3 rows of teeth, a human head and ears, blue eyes, a tail ending in a series of spikes and stings, thorny and scorpion-like, and a voice which sounds like the blare of trumpets. This synthetic quadruped ambled into medieval works on natural history, but though seriously considered, has never been seen because it inhabited inaccessible regions and consequently was very difficult to locate. I'm sure that is the reason. Yes, definitely the spike ball tail is something that I remember being very important, and also some kind of venomous nature. I remember it being an important, or something that would show up in Dungeons and Dragons a lot. The Royal Egyptian Scarab. This is from Hall's Catalogue of Egyptian Scarabs, etc. in the British Museum. The flat underside of a scarab usually bears an inscription relating to the dynasty during which it was cut. These scarabs were sometimes used as seals. Some were cut from ordinary or precious stones. Others were made of clay, baked and glazed. Occasionally the stone scarabs were also glazed. The majority of the small scarabs are pierced as though originally used as beads. Some are so hard that they will cut glass. That's interesting. In the picture above, A shows top and side views of the scarab, and B the surface, the undersurface, with the name Min Ka Ra within the central cartouche. Let's see, I could probably zoom in. Wonder if this is Ra, because Ra must be represented by the solar disk. This would then be Ka. Ka meaning spirit in Egyptian. Men. I don't know what the meaning of it. I've heard that that these scarabs could also have been a imprinting for wax or something like that, for seals. Maybe with ink they could be used for pressing on papyrus. I don't know. Definitely. Well, maybe it's better if it's larger, actually. for the people reading it on the video, which I guess is dumb, but I want to make it accessible for people, and it's better than having subtitles. But now we have to go way down. Okay. Now we're going down to the scorpion. The scorpion is the symbol of both wisdom and self-destruction. It was called by the Egyptians the creature accursed. The time of year when the sun entered the sign of Scorpio marked the beginning of the rulership of Typhon. When the 12 signs of the zodiac were used to represent the 12 apostles, although the reverse is true, the 12 apostles represent the 12 signs of the zodiac, I guess is what he means. The scorpion was assigned to Judas Iscariot, the betrayer. The scorpion stings with its tail, and for this reason it has been called a backbiter, a false and deceitful thing, as people know from the story of the frog and the scorpion, which I don't feel the need to repeat here. I think everyone probably knows that story. Calmet, in his Dictionary of the Bible, declares the scorpion to be a fit emblem of the wicked and the symbol of persecution. The dry winds of Egypt are said to be produced by Typhon, who imparts to the sand the blistering heat of the infernal world and the sting of the scorpion. This insect was also the symbol of the spinal fire, which, according to the Egyptian mysteries, destroyed man when it was permitted to gather at the base of his spine, the tail of the scorpion. Then again, reflecting this, what we were talking about Kundalini earlier. If it's led to settle at the base and only represent lust and hunger, it becomes it's overwhelming and drives a person to evil. The red star Antares is the back of the celestial scorpion. In the back of the celestial scorpion was considered the worst light in the heavens. Kal Olakrab, or the heart of the scorpion, was called by the ancients the lieutenant or deputy of Mars, probably because of its color. See footnote to Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos. Antares was believed to impair the eyesight, often causing blindness if it rose over the horizon when a child was born. This may refer again to the sandstorm, which was capable of blinding unwary travelers. The scorpion was also the symbol of wisdom, for the fire which it controlled was capable of illuminating as well as consuming. Initiation into the greater mysteries among the pagans was said to take place only in the sign of the scorpion. In the papyrus of Ani, the Book of the Dead, the deceased likens his soul to a scorpion, saying, "I am a swallow. I am that scorpion, the daughter of Ra." Elizabeth Goldsmith, in her treatise on sex symbolism, states that scorpions were a symbol of Selk, the Egyptian goddess of writing, perhaps for its tail's similarity to a quill, and also were revered by the Babylonians and Assyrians as guardians of that gateway of the sun. Maybe they would even use a scorpion stinger as a writing implement. I don't know if it would be useful as that or not. 7 scorpions were said to have accompanied Isis when she searched for the remains of Osiris scattered by Set, Typhon. In his Chaldean account of the Genesis, George Smith, copying from the cuneiform cylinders, in describing the wanderings of the Hillu Itzdubar, which is Nimrod, throws some light on the scorpion god who guards the sun. The tablet which he translated is not perfect, but the meaning is fairly clear. Who each day guard the rising sun. Their crown was at the lattice of heaven. Under hell their feet were placed, the spinal column. The scorpion man guarded the gate, burning with terribleness. Their appearance was like death. The might of his fear shook the forest. At the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun, they guarded the sun. Izdubar saw them, and fear and terror came into his face. Among the early Latins, there was a machine of war called the scorpion. It was used for firing arrows and probably obtained its name from a long beam, resembling a scorpion's tail, which flew up to hurl the arrows. The missiles discharged by this machine were also called scorpions. The butterfly, under the name Psyche, a beautiful maiden with wings of opalescent light, whose name also means mind or soul, or kind of soul, symbolizes the human soul because of the stages it passes through in order to unfold its powers of flight. The three divisions through which the butterfly passes in its unfoldment resemble closely the 3 degrees of the mystery school, which degrees are regarded as consummating the unfoldment of man by giving him emblematic wings by which he may soar in the skies. Unregenerate man, ignorant and helpless, is symbolized by the stage between ovum and larva. The disciple, seeking truth and dwelling in medication, by the second stage, from larva to pupa, at which time the insect enters its chrysalis, the tomb of the mysteries, or descends into death, as in baptism or in the Masonic ritual. The third stage, from pupa to imago, wherein the perfect butterfly comes forth, typifies the unfolded enlightened soul of the initiate rising from the tomb of his basic nature. This is actually symbolized by dying. This happens at death. The body is seen as being the tomb of the spirit and the soul. And the soul body and the spirit, which inspirits it or enlivens it, gives it life, and gives the body life by extension. It is a production of the body, and so it's like the body is just a chrysalis from which the soul emerges. Night moths typify the secret wisdom because they are hard to discover and are concealed by the darkness, ignorance. Some are emblems of death, as Acherontia atropos, the death's head moth, which has a marking on its body somewhat like a human skull. The death watch beetle, which was believed to give warnings of approaching death by a peculiar ticking sound. In another instance of insects involved in human affairs. Opinions differ concerning the spider. Its shape makes it an appropriate emblem of the nerve plexus and ganglia of the human body. Some Europeans consider it extremely bad luck to kill a spider, possibly because it is looked upon as an emissary of the evil one, whom no person desires to offend. There is a mystery concerning all poisonous creatures, especially insects. Paracelsus taught that the spider was the medium for a powerful but evil force which the black magicians used in their nefarious undertakings. I've never liked them much personally. Certain plants, minerals, and animals have been sacred among all the nations of the earth because of their peculiar sensitiveness to the astral fire, a mysterious agency in nature which the scientific world has contacted through its manifestations as electricity and magnetism. Lodestone and radium in the mineral world and various parasitic growths in the plant kingdom are strangely susceptible to this cosmic electric fire or universal life force. The magicians of the Middle Ages surrounded themselves with such creatures as bats, spiders, cats, snakes, and monkeys because they were able to appropriate the life forces of these species and use them to the attainment of their own ends. Some ancient schools of wisdom taught that all poisonous insects and reptiles are germinated out of the evil nature of man, and that when intelligent human beings no longer breed hate in their own souls, there will be no more ferocious animals, loathsome diseases, or poisonous plants and insects. And this is another reflection of the as within, so without, or as above, so below. Among the American Indians is the legend of a Spider-Man. Also among the modern Americans, whose web connected the heaven worlds with the earth. The secret schools of India symbolize certain of the gods who labored with the universe during its making as connecting the realms of light with those of darkness by means of webs. Therefore, the builders of the cosmic system, who held the embryonic universe together with threads of invisible force, were sometimes referred to as the spider gods, and their ruler was designated the Great Spider. The beehive is found within masonry as a reminder that in diligence and labor for a common good, true happiness and prosperity are found. The bee is a symbol of wisdom, for as this tiny insect collects pollen from the flowers, so men may extract wisdom from the experiences of daily life. The bee is sacred to the goddess Venus, and according to mystics, it is one of several forms of life which came to the earth from the planet Venus millions of years ago. It has been said by many various mystics, but especially seems to be popular among those in the Theosophical school. Wheat and bananas are said to be of similar origin. This is the reason why the origin of these three forms of life cannot be traced. The fact that bees are ruled by queens is one reason why the insect is considered a sacred feminine symbol. In India, the god Prana, the personification of the universal life force, is sometimes shown surrounded by a circle of bees. It also means the breath. Prana means breath. And the life force, or that which gives spirit to things, is also seen as being breath in Hebrew and Greek in the languages. Spirit is pneuma in Greek and ruach in Hebrew. Because of its importance in pollinizing flowers, the bee is the accepted symbol of the generative power. At one time, the bee was the emblem of the French kings. The rulers of France wore robes embroidered with bees, and the canopies of their thrones were decorated with gigantic figures of this insect. Bees are also used in Mormonism, which I use as a more general term than the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because there are other groups which are Mormon, descending from the Reformation or Restoration of Joseph Smith, but not associated with the modern church. But they use the beehive as a symbol of industry, and it's the symbol of Utah, the state of Utah, today. The fly symbolizes the tormentor because of the annoyance it causes to animals. The Chaldean god Baal was often called Baal-zebul or Beelzebub, for the god of the dwelling place. Actually, the word zebub, not zebul, the word zebub or zebub means fly, and Baal-zebub became, Baal-zebul, god of the dwelling place, became Baal-zebub or Beelzebub, a word which was loosely translated to mean Jupiter's fly. I think it means, Baal means Lord. It means Lord of flies. And in that sense, it was used by Hebrews in reference to Gehinnom. Gehinnom was a particular valley, which actually means the Valley of Fire. And the Valley of Fire was an actual place. It was an actual place where people Canaanites in particular, took trash to burn. And supposedly, this is also connected to the worship of Moloch and or Molech, and the burning of, or the passing of children through the fire. Ritual sacrifice of perhaps children, though the biblical story is not clear on whether they were sacrificed by passing through fire or whether that was merely a kind of initiation. In Carthage, they did in fact sacrifice children, and to Baal Hamun, which is Baal Amun, or the Lord Amun, the god of the Egyptians and god of the Canaanites. Amun Ra, the sun god. But seems to have been related also to Moloch worship. And so Baal-zebub is usually related to Moloch in that sense, or related to, and in that way becomes related with, for example, Satan in the modern day. The The fly was looked upon as one of the forms of divine power, which is why it was called Jupiter's fly. And this is another explanation, but I think that the Hebrews used Baal-zebub as a pejorative, and he was Lord of the Flies because in the valley Gehenna, where they would go burn trash, that it would attract flies because of all the detritus. So there you go. That's an alternative. The fly was looked upon as a form of the divine power because of its ability to destroy decaying substances and thus promote health. Sometimes maggots were used to clean wounds, for example. The fly may have obtained its name zebub from its particular buzzing or humming. Inman believes that Baal-zebub, which the Jews ridiculed as my lord of flies, really means my lord who hums or murmurs. That could be, and in that sense, it may reflect the syllable om, which is seen as being the hum of the earth, the intrinsic vibration of the earth nature. Inman recalls the singing Memnon of the Egyptian desert, a tremendous figure with an Aeolian harp on the top of its head. When the wind blows strongly, this great statue sighs or hums. The Jews changed Baal-zebub into Beelzebub and made him their prince of devils by interpreting demon as demon. Nadius, in defending Virgil from accusations of sorcery, attempted a wholesale denial of the miracles supposedly performed by Virgil, and produced enough evidence to convict the poet on all counts. Among other strange fears, Virgil fashioned a fly out of brass, and after certain mysterious ceremonies, placed it over one of the gates of Naples. As a result, no flies entered the city for more than 8 years. I'd be interested to look up that myth and see if there's any, maybe the fly still exists in a museum or something. I'm going to just check the chat real quick before we move to the next section. Makes a good periodic time. Eric Littlebig says, "This is great, thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you for coming. Namaste," as they say. Reptiles. The serpent was chosen as the head of the reptile family. Serpent worship in some form has permeated nearly all parts of the earth. The serpent mounds of the American Indian, the carved stones of Central and South America, the hooded cobras of India, Python, the great snake of the Greeks, the sacred serpents of the Druids, the Midgard snake of Scandinavia. We mentioned earlier Jormungandr, or Jormungandr. It must be Gundr. Jormungandr. The Nagas of Burma, Siam, and Cambodia, the brazen serpent of the Jews, the mystic serpent of Orpheus, the snake at the oracle of Delphi, twinning themselves around the tripod upon which the Pythian princess sat. Pythian also being a reference to pythons. The tripod itself being formed of twisted serpents. The sacred serpents preserved in the Egyptian temples. The uraeus coiled around the foreheads of the pharaohs and priests. All of these bear witness to the universal veneration in which the snakes were held. In the ancient mysteries, the serpent entwining a staff was the symbol of a physician. That's the symbol of Asclepius, and you see it on the side of a ambulance today. The serpent-wound staff of Hermes remains the emblem of the medical profession. Among nearly all these ancient peoples, the serpent was accepted as the symbol of wisdom or salvation. The antipathy which Christendom feels towards the snake is based upon the little understood allegory of the Garden of Eden. Let's take a look at these pictures real quick. The fleur-de-lis. The bee was used as a symbol of royalty by the immortal Charlemagne, and it is probable that the fleur-de-lis, or lily of France, is merely a conventionalized bee and not a flower. I don't know. I've never heard that before. Could be. Could be. Dad joke. I'm not a dad, but it's funny. There is an ancient Greek legend to the effect that the 9 muses occasionally assumed the form of bees. Is this supposed to be about the fleur-de-lis? Oh, the bee was you. Oh, about Charlemagne? I'm not sure what this is supposed to be a picture of. This doesn't seem to be about bees at all. No, I don't. Okay. The scorpion often appears upon talismans and charms of the Middle Ages. This hieroglyphic arachnida was supposed to have the power of curing disease. The scorpion shown above was composed of several metals and was made under certain planetary configurations. Paracelsus advised that it be worn by those suffering from any derangement of the reproductive system. Ori Sapo. It says Prelec. Something like that. I'm not sure. Maybe that's not a lambda. I think it's a lambda, though. Prelec. Anyway, it's a scorpion of some kind. It doesn't have any claws, and it doesn't really... Huh. But a lot of those things were drawn without seeing them in ancient times. In Tandem DJ brings up that this picture looked kind of like Saturn, I think was his reference. That's a good point. Also, we can see these vines back here, maybe symbolizing Bacchus. And we see these satyrs, which are also symbols of Bacchus, and he could be in a state of madness. And we went into the Bacchic mysteries in previous videos, a very interesting subject, which I recommend going back and looking at. In Tandem DJ also said that in the movie Constantine, they used flies to symbolize demons. And it's very common to see things like that. I think that there must be, I have in my head other movies that had similar demonic symbolism, but I'm not quite sure what the names of those movies were, but I feel like I have seen them. So, going back to this sentence here, the antipathy with Christendom feels towards the snake is based upon the little understood allegory of the Garden of Eden. Because, in the mysteries, the serpent is seen as being the true principle of wisdom, for it tempts man to the knowledge of himself. And, for example, tempting man to the knowledge of good and evil, and he becomes aware of the evil in himself, and thus sees himself as naked, and must clothe himself. Therefore, the knowledge of self resulted from man's disobedience to the demiurgus Jehovah. So there's a conflict in Gnosticism, which some say that Jehovah or Yahweh is the demiurge, and some say that the demiurge is a separate being than the ultimate God, and that the ultimate God is Yahweh still, and that Jesus is a manifestation of Yahweh. The ultimate God, who came to save us from the demiurge, basically. And that would put the demiurge, he's the sun. If we were talking about, like we were talking about the scarab and the sun, where the actual sun is just dung. The scarab rolls the sun across the sky. That's a ball of dung. And so maybe the dung is the demiurge. That's the material through which the universe is made. The demiurge is the material creator, and or the lesser creator. We could say, if, for example, let's say that there was a planetary god who created us, rather than a universal god, God of everything. he wasn't a god of everything, but just a god of this planet or just this solar system. And that would be a demiurge, because he wouldn't be all powerful. He would be much more powerful than us, but he would be an intermediary figure, like we were talking about earlier. In any case, he's referencing the Gnosticism, which identifies Jehovah as the name of the demiurge, or the Old Testament God as the name of, or as the demiurge. But that is, even within Gnosticism, people have widely varying opinions. How the serpent came to be in the garden of the Lord after God had declared that all creatures that he made during the 6 days of creation were good has not been satisfactorily answered by the interpreters of Scripture. The tree that grows in the midst of the garden is the spinal fire. The knowledge of the use of that spinal fire is the gift of the great serpent, which climbs the spinal fire, as we were saying, the Kundalini serpent energy climbs the spine. Notwithstanding statements to the contrary, the serpent is the symbol and prototype of the universal Savior, who redeems the world by giving creation the knowledge of itself and the realization of good and evil. I believe a friend of ours named John Titor would recognize that as Luciferianism, this concept as being one associated with what he would identify as Luciferian. Well, it's typically Masonic. If this be not so, why did Moses raise a brazen serpent upon a cross in the wilderness, that all who looked upon it might be saved from the sting of the lesser snakes? Was not the brazen serpent a prophecy of the crucified man to come? If the serpent be only a thing of evil, why did Christ instruct his disciples to be wise as serpents? The accepted theory that the serpent is evil cannot be substantiated. It has long been viewed as the emblem of immortality. It is the symbol of reincarnation, or metempsychosis, because it annually sheds its skin, reappearing, as it were, in a new body. There is an ancient superstition to the effect that snakes never die except by violence, and that, if uninjured, they would live forever. It was also believed that snakes swallowed themselves, like an Ouroboros, the snake swallowing its own tail. And this resulted in their being considered emblematic of the Supreme Creator, who periodically reabsorbed his universe back into himself and created it again. In Isis Unveiled, H.P. Blavatsky makes this significant statement concerning the origin of serpent worship. Before our globe had become egg-shaped or round, it was a long trail of cosmic dust or fire mist, moving and wreathing like a serpent. This, say the explanations, was the Spirit of God moving on the chaos until its breath had incubated cosmic matter and made it assume the annular shape of a serpent with its tail in its mouth, the emblem of eternity in its spiritual and of our world in its physical sense. The seven-headed snake represents the supreme deity manifested through his Elohim, or seven spirits, which are also the seven lowers, Sephiroth, in the Tree of Life, or the seven chakras, or the seven planets, or the seven colors of the rainbow, the seven tones of the musical scale, so on and so on, by whose aid he established his universe. The coils of the snake have been used by the pagans to symbolize the motion and also the orbits of the celestial bodies, and it is probable that the symbol of the serpent twisted around the egg, which was common to many of the ancient mystery schools, represented both the apparent motion of the sun around the earth and the bands of astral light, or the great magical agent, which move around the planet incessantly. Electricity was commonly symbolized by the serpent because of its motion. Electricity passing between the poles of a spark gap is serpentine in its motion. And as In Tandem DJ brought up earlier, in the electric universe theory, it's said to resemble plasma discharge in the sky, or one could think of a lightning bolt. Force projected through the atmosphere was called the Great Snake, exactly what he was saying. Being symbolic of universal force, the serpent was emblematic of both good and evil. Force can tear down as rapidly as it can build up. The serpent with its tail in its mouth is the symbol of eternity, for in this position the body of the reptile has neither beginning nor end. The head and tail represent the positive and negative poles of the cosmic life circle. The initiates of the mysteries were often referred to as serpents, and their wisdom was considered analogous to the divinely inspired power of the snake. There is no doubt that the title winged serpents, he says with a question mark, the seraphim, a rank of angels, was given to one of the invisible hierarchies that labored with the earth during its early formation. The winged serpent was also Quetzalcoatl of the Mesoamericans, and we can also say that it's interesting that initiates are associated with the snake, and you could listen to, for example, David Icke. David Icke will bring up that he believes that he'll talk about reptilians ruling the world, a sect of reptilians. They could be, and they're deeply entrenched in, for example, he believes the Vatican, and also in high places in the United States and the United Kingdom, for example. And in the Vatican, one of their conference places is shaped like the head of a snake and is very serpentine. People have remarked on that many times and believe it's quite sinister looking. It may be related to what we're talking about here. There is a legend that in the beginning of the world, winged serpents reigned upon the earth. These were probably the demigods which antedate the historical civilization of every nation. The symbolic relationship between the sun and the serpent found literal witness in the fact that life remains in the snake until sunset, even though it be cut into a dozen parts. Snakes are very hard to kill when you cut them, but when the sun is still up, the body has heat, I guess is their point. Snakes go to sleep when the sun goes down. The Hopi Indians considered the serpent to be in close communication with the earth spirit. Therefore, at the time of their annual snake dance, they send their prayers to the earth spirit by first specifying or specially sanctifying large numbers of these reptiles and then liberating them to return to the earth with the prayers of the tribe. The great rapidity of motion manifested by lizards has caused them to be associated with Mercury, the messenger of the gods, whose winged feet traveled infinite distances almost instantaneously. A point which must not be overlooked in connection with the reptiles and symbolism is clearly brought out by the eminent scholar Dr. H.E. Sante in his Anatomy of the Brain and Spinal Cord. In reptiles, there are two pineal bodies, an anterior and a posterior, of which the posterior remains undeveloped, but the anterior forms a rudimentary cyclopean eye. Actually, I believe that in a certain sense, the human human pineal gland also is kind of an underdeveloped eye, third eye, you could say, but it has a central position, so it could be seen as cyclopean. In the Hatteria, a New Zealand lizard, it projects through the parietal foramen and presents an imperfect lens and retina, and in its long stalk, nerve fibers. So it actually becomes a third eye. And it's known to have ocular, it has a retinal pathway of its own, because it's used to regulate melatonin production in the bodies of human beings. And people also speculate that it's there to regulate production of other tryptamines, melatonin being related to the tryptamine class of chemicals, such as tryptophan, which makes you sleepy as well, and found in, for example, turkey meat, but also dimethyltryptamine or 4-PO dimethyltryptamine, which is psilocin, the psychoactive chemical, which is the result of breaking down psilocybin in the gut. Crocodiles were regarded by the Egyptians both as symbols of Typhon and emblems of the supreme deity. Of the latter, because while underwater, the crocodile is capable of seeing, Plutarch asserts, through its eyes, though its eyes are covered by a thin membrane. The Egyptians declared that no matter how far away the crocodile laid its eggs, the Nile would reach up to them in its next inundation. This reptile being endowed with a mysterious sense capable of making known the extent of the flood months before it took place. There were two kinds of crocodiles. The larger and more ferocious was hated by the Egyptians, for they likened it to the nature of Typhon, their destroying demon. Typhon waited to devour all those who failed to pass the judgment of the dead, which rite took place in the Hall of Judgment between the earth and the Elysian Fields. I believe we've discussed this in a previous video. Anthony Todd Thompson thus describes the good treatment accorded to smaller and tamer crocodiles, which the Egyptians accepted as personifications of good. They were fed daily and occasionally had mulled wine poured down their throats. Their ears were ornamented with rings of gold and precious stones, and their forefeet adorned with bracelets. To the Chinese, the turtle was a symbol of longevity. At a temple in Singapore, a number of sacred turtles are kept. Their age recorded by carvings on their shells. The American Indians used the ridge down the back of the turtle shell as a symbol of the great divide between life and death. Going back to the Chinese briefly, the Chinese used the turtle shell for much more than just that. The turtle shell was used for the earliest I Ching divinations, and the earliest kinds of I Ching were derived from a kind of diagram which was said to have been on the back of a turtle as it emerged from a certain river. And there are two different diagrams of that kind, but they're important to understanding the numerology of the I Ching. Much of the early carvings of the Chinese, in terms of linguistics, was made on turtle shells. They engraved the early Chinese characters on turtle or tortoise shells. The turtle is a symbol of wisdom because it retires into itself and is its own protection. It is also a phallic symbol, as its relation to long life would signify. In Chinese, in Taoist texts, sometimes they call the penis the turtle head. It's a euphemistic reference and I guess it's because it hides in its shell until it needs to come out. The Hindus symbolize the universe as being supported on the back of 4 great elephants, who in turn are standing upon an immense turtle, which is crawling continually through chaos. The Egyptian Sphinx, the Greek centaur, and the Assyrian man-bull have much in common. All are composite creatures combining human and animal members. In the mysteries, all signify the composite nature of man and subtly refer to the hierarchies of celestial beings that have charge of the destiny of mankind. These hierarchies are the 12 holy animals, now known as constellations, star groups which are merely symbols of impersonal spiritual impulses. Chiron, the centaur, which is the, I believe it's the moon that is around Pluto, the name of the moon around Pluto, teaching, or either that or it's an asteroid. No, I'm pretty sure it's the moon around Pluto. Teaching the sons of men symbolizes the intelligences of the constellation of Sagittarius, who are the custodians of the secret doctrine. Actually, I don't even think Pluto, the planet, had been discovered when this book was written. It was written in 1928, I believe, and I think Pluto was discovered in the early 1930s. So Chiron, the centaur, symbolizes the intelligences of the constellation of Sagittarius, who are custodians of the secret doctrine, while geocentrically the sun passed through the sign of Gemini. The 5-footed Assyrian man bull, with its wings of an eagle and the head of a man, is a reminder that an invisible nature of man has the wings of God and the head of a man and the body of a beast. The same concept was expressed through the Sphinx, that armed goddess of the mysteries, who, crouching at the gate of the temple, denied entrance to the profane. Thus placed between man and his divine possibilities, the Sphinx also represented the secret doctrine itself, and represents, for example, in the tarot deck, on top of the Wheel of Fortune, it represents the giver of knowledge, or the keeper of knowledge, I should say more accurately, because the Sphinx is a gatekeeper, and it keeps out the unworthy, and thus rules over the world, the Wheel of Fortune, and keeps the unworthy from success. Children's fairy stories abound with descriptions of symbolic monsters, for nearly all such tales are based on the ancient mystic folklore. Now we have just a couple more pictures. And I'll say, if you have any questions, it would be good to ask them now, because there's a delay in the stream. Usually I ask at the end, but it's hard to see them sometimes. So if you have them, ask them in the YouTube chat now, while I do this, while I talk about these pictures. So this is the Uraeus from Kircher's Oedipus Egypticus. Then this is the spinal cord was symbolized by a snake, and the serpent coiled upon the foreheads of the Egyptian initiates represented the divine fire, which had crawled serpent-like upon the tree of life. This is the emblem that was on the crown of the Egyptians, of the Egyptian pharaohs. Actually, the Egyptian pharaoh's crown had many symbols that were related to animals. In fact, had the proboscis of a bee. One of the interesting things about Joseph Smith was that in the Book of Mormon, he claimed that it was he had translated it from a language called Reformed Egyptian. And in this language, one of the few words that he leaves untranslated is Deshret, or Deseret, I mean, Deseret, which means honeybee, according to Joseph Smith in the Book of Mormon. But in Egypt, this part of the crown, which is actually the crown of Lower Egypt, the wealthier part of Egypt that is along the Nile Delta, lower meaning toward the lower part of the river, or meaning toward the ocean. That part of the crown, it was red, and it had a honeybee's proboscis, and it was called Deshret in Egyptian. And that's something that was not even known at the time of Joseph Smith, had not been recovered. So there's no way he could have known that the word Deseret or Deseret was referred to a honeybee, or its proboscis, or the crown. So that's just one of those anomalous things I think is interesting. The next one is good and evil contending for the universal egg, after which we'll take a look at some questions. This is from Maurice's Indian Antiquities. It says, both Mithras, the Persian redeemer, and Serapis, the Egyptian god of the earth, are symbolized by serpents coiled around their bodies. This remarkable drawing shows the good and evil principles of Persia, Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, contending for the egg of the earth, with each trying to wrench it from the teeth of the other. These are that's what it says, the two principles of Persia symbolized by the two serpents. They're wrestling over this egg, good and evil. It's very interesting, actually. So in the YouTube chat, In Tandem DJ says, asks, so the serpent symbolism in the Vatican may not refer to something nefarious like conspiracists believe, but rather to the divine nature of the serpent and possibly seraphim. That's true. It could, and in fact, a lot of the time when we talk about occult symbolism, a lot of things are interpreted as being nefarious that may not actually be nefarious. And that's not to say that they aren't, or that different sects interpret them differently and use them for different purposes. So it's very common that something could be viewed as good by one sect and viewed as evil by someone else, or viewed as something that we would call good by that sect, and by some other sect, they think that it means something that we would view as evil. An example is, for example, the Molech worship in the Bible. It said that they passed children through the fire. But it's not very clear what it means to be passed through the fire. As I was talking about earlier with the sacrifice of children in Carthage, clearly they did sacrifice children in Carthage, and Baal-Haman is associated with Baal-Zebub, who is Moloch, and also Cronus, who ate his children. Cronus of the Greeks, who ate his children. And so it's very possible that it could mean literal burning of the children to the god Moloch. But it could also, it has been suggested that either other sects or some people had a version of the passing of children through the fire, which did not involve sacrificing them by fire, but they would jump over a fire, and it signified it was a rite of passage or initiation, in which they were able to do something scary to symbolically pass over death, basically. In the same way as most initiations, or almost all initiations that we're talking about, involve kind of a symbolic death and rebirth. Eric Littlebig brings up, how about the brass sculpture behind the Pope? When we were talking about he says it was the Pope's audience hall. Maybe right now I can take a moment. I can look up a picture of the Pope's audience hall to show how it looks. How it looks like a snake. It's quite serpentine in appearance. I got a good picture to represent it here. Let's see. Let me put it up here on the stream. Okay. Here we go. So this is it on the stream. It looks kind of like a serpent's head, and I've seen other pictures that are kind of even more so than this, but it does look like a serpent's head. Also, we can see Eric Littlebig brings up this this brass sculpture behind the Pope. It's very weird looking. It's kind of dendritic. It reminds me of it reminds me of wood, kind of wood. But I think, first of all, it's awfully ugly, and second of all, I don't know. It does not give me as good spiritual vibe. Nothing about this place really gives me a good spiritual vibe. It feels pretty negative. Eric Littlebig says that that was built, that audience hall was built in the 1970s, so it's not very old. So yeah, these one theme that goes through a lot of these videos is how the Catholic Church and Christianity in general is basically just a whitewashing or reclothing of the ancient mystery schools, and how they, and the LDS churches too. There's many the mystery schools have survived into the modern day in many ways, and I think that that people don't quite realize their connection to the ancient religions. That's why I brought up the Dagon thing. So this says, oh, Eric Littlebig said the sculpture is said to be Christ returning after a nuclear war. Yeah, that seems pretty bad. I don't know. My thing isn't quite working right. I don't know. All this it's weird. Yeah, it doesn't my webcam's not working. Anyway, that's okay. I pulled up one of our friends from Mr. Dick Butkus brought up oh, I guess he's not talking about our stream. He pinged me on Discord, and I thought maybe he was talking about the stream. Okay. Yeah. Eric Littlebit is saying Christ coming from the earth in that sculpture, whereas Christ is said is coming from the sky in Revelations. It's it's a very scary sculpture in any case. I don't know why I'm having so many flickering problems. It's very strange, but oh well, I guess. Yeah, how weird. Well, anyway, I'm gonna play us out. I'll have a nice. I'm gonna play some Native American flute for us. I hope everyone has a blessed rest of your day. Thank you for watching. Thank you.